Excuse me, everyone. So, hi. As you can see, we have classes from ICT-Animation A, B, C, and D. So for today, so the exposure sheet, just to give you a small idea, is that it's more or less a more complicated type of time chart. So it has a lot more technicalities than it is yung sa may time chart natin. And for us to be able to fully utilize it, I'll have to showcase it through yung audio recording natin. But before that, let me just showcase yung activities natin. So for your module 6 and 7, it was mostly just a self-check, which is around 15 points. So it's a multiple choice, more or less there's not really a lot of technical application. It's more or less just reflecting what is in the knowledge of the modules. Whereas for this one, we have 30 points and it's actually divided into two parts. So the reason why is because you need this one first before we move on to the actual activity, which is your exposure sheet. So we will be having 10 points for the audio recording. So for the audio recording, this might need to have some preparation. During your module 6 and 7, medyo nasabi na on what's supposed to happen. But essentially for this one, you will be creating a recording of a soundbite of your original character. So soundbite essentially is kind of like a catchphrase or something that your character tends to say. So ang nakalagay dito is that it should more or less encompass the character's morals, but that's not necessarily the case as long as it's something that the character's usually saying. So like let's say for I'm not really entirely sure what the proper term is, pero if you have like hero games, like let's say Dota 2, League of Legends, Mobile Legends, every single hero that you have there tends to have a certain saying. So, yun yung basically na gusto kong makuha from this one. It just needs to be very short, 3 to 5 seconds long lang. Not too short naman na 2 seconds and also not too long naman na more than 6 seconds. So at least for this one, you can accumulate mga around 1 o kaya naman 2 exposure sheets. May I just suggest that you try to not make it or I'm kind of expecting there would be someone who will just be creating like 3 seconds just saying the word like I don't know no for a really long time. So please try not to do that. At least try to have a sentence talaga or at least a phrase, something that you can actually time chart or using gamitin yung exposure sheet natin. So for your soundbite, it should be something that is reflected to your original character. So yung original character natin, you can utilize your module 1 run cycle. And if ever it's necessary for you to modify it, please do so that it is fit for dialogue. Because the reason kung bakit tayo may audio recording is because you'll be animating what is in the audio recording. So with that one, the character should be at least able to speak o kaya naman and also do some secondary actions o kaya naman actions that can complement the original audio recording. So in creating the audio recording, you can either record it yourself o kaya naman let someone else record it for you. So the example that I'll be showing you is I had someone else record it for me. So you can do something like that one as well. However, I may ask that you do not use computer-generated programs, paid talent, so yung mga Fiverr na yan, so that you don't have to utilize monetary or you don't have to spend for that one. O kaya naman pre-existing recordings, like let's say voice acting that you've seen or heard in a movie, in a game, and so on and so forth. You can more or less have non-unique sayings. So, kahit na like let's say you've heard of this saying already on TV or it's something that's very common, you can still use that. Pero please make sure that it's of an organic recording that's either by you o kaya naman sabihin natin you have a sibling or if you have a cousin that tends to have a better voice acting skill than you. So pwede yung you can ask them to do the recording for you. Anyway, it's just 3 to 5 seconds. For the recording, you can use any recording device. Your phone will work. If you have your microphone or if you have your headset or earphones with a microphone, you can utilize that. Yung audio recording natin, please try not to have anything that has dead air. So, dapat kung ano lang yung gagamitin natin, yun lang yun. You can then extend the dead air later on when you animate. And also, if you would like to do some audio recording, you can do so, but please don't overly distort. Like, let's say, masyado mataas yung pitch, o kaya naman, whichever other distortions. And the one that you will be sending to me, MP3 lang po. Walang gagamit ng M4A or whatsoever. MP3 lang so that it's a bit smaller compared to M4A. So, meron tayong criteria dito, pero in reality, as long as you submit something, automatic 10 points na yun. So, it's just for formality's sake, pero I'm saying it to you right now, if you can submit something and it's good, then automatic 10 points. If it's not good or if it's something that you can't really utilize, I'll have to ask you to redo it as well. So, that's for your audio recording. Next one naman is the exposure sheet. So, I'm just showcasing it to you so that once we move on to the activity, you at least can kind of get what we need to be able to do. So for the exposure sheet, based on the audio recording, you will be recording or you will be timing it using yung exposure sheet natin. So for this one, we have a certain template, which we'll be seeing later. But essentially, this is the one that all of us will be utilizing. So yung mga parts na to will be explained a little bit later. Pero essentially, you will only be needing one page. You can need 2 pages, particularly if your audio recording lasts mga around more than 4 seconds. Pero if it's not really necessary, or if your recording is around 3 to 4 seconds, okay lang naman na isang page siya. Tapos you will be utilizing a PNG or a JPEG. Originally, this is from Excel, but later on you'll be seeing na kailangan talaga more or less it has to be an image. You can also print this and then write it down. O kaya naman it is possible for you to be able to do this format on your own. However, it's important for you to follow, of course, yung number of lines and so on. So if you don't have a printer or if it's really necessary for you to just do this format yourself, it's entirely possible for you to do that. Okay. So aside from the exposure sheet, we also have the action. So of course, the main action will be the character saying what the audio recording is saying. However, dapat we have some layouting options because you will also be animating this one on top of the dialogue. So first of all is that the character should be of the focus of the frame and dapat yung character natin is around half body. So if you would like to create a bust form, that's fine. The point right here is that kailangan makita yung movement ng mouth. If the mouth is not really visible, then there's no actual point of us even doing the mouth codes or the lip syncing, which will be for your modules 9 and 10. Next one, yung character lang natin yung kailangan. So the one that you've done for your modules 4 and 5, kind of similar to that one as well. And then yung sa may face or where the character is facing, bahala kayo. It can be front, side, 3/4, or a combination. Might I suggest front and 3/4 because side view is very difficult to do lip syncing. Pero if you want side view and you really want the challenge, then you're free to do so. Also, walang back view so that may point naman yung lip syncing natin. And then on top of the main action, we need to have one secondary action or rather 2 secondary actions. So there should be at least one facial expression change o kaya naman one body and also one body movement. So itong facial expression change naman na to, it doesn't have to be entirely it doesn't have to be too extravagant. So kahit na like let's say a change in terms of intensity. So sabihin natin the character is happy saying the audio recording and then you make them more happy, you can do something like that. O kaya naman a slight change in surprise or the character becomes a little bit surprised in the sequence. You can do something like that one as well. For the body movement, that would depend on you. You can have hand movements, you can have shoulder movements, you can have them turn, whichever. It doesn't have to be, again, overly extravagant. At least something should be there. Also, if you would like to add blinking, you can do so on top of the facial expression change. No need for the adding of camera instructions because ang point natin dito is that the camera should not really be moving because if you're going to make it move, that's another entirely different thing. Like, you'll have to animate, you'll have to do a higher level of animating. But if you would like to do so, not necessarily have unique camera instructions, but if you have them, that would allow you for higher points. If you don't add them, that's fine as well. So here we have the template. You will be utilizing the same template. Again, you can create your own o kaya naman you can utilize this one as is. So this is going to be worth 20 points. So 10 points is on the dialogue itself, and then the other 10 points would be for the other things on the exposure sheet. So that would include yung actions, camera instructions if you have them, layering, sequence, and so on and so forth. So with that one, I hope you kind of have an idea of what you're going to do with the activity. And with that, let us now begin with the exposure sheet. So in this one, I'll be talking about, like, let's say a lot of the audio, and then afterwards I'll be showcasing how you can use yung exposure sheet natin. So first of all, let's have a short introduction of what the exposure sheet is. Actually, in terms of animation, this is probably one of the more technical aspects of it. So for a lot of animators, when they tend to see an exposure sheet and they have to do something like that, it's quite complicated. And it is at the first glance. But once that you have looked into it a lot more, then you'll see that it's not very different compared to that of it's not very different compared to that one of a time chart. And usually kasi ang exposure sheet, the people who will be using them or who will be writing them down are the keyframe animators or animation directors. So should you go towards the industry, your only job is for you to kind of understand and also follow the instructions that are placed on the exposure sheet. However, in this activity for your modules 8 to 10, you will have the experience of actually creating your exposure sheet, creating your own keyframes, creating your own entire sequence. So with that one, the exposure sheet is more or less also known as an X sheet or a dope sheet. And ang pinaka-purpose niya, as we've stated, it's kind of like a time chart, but a lot more instructions. So the instructions would also include, let's say, very specific timing down to the second. Kasi sa may time chart natin, like, yeah, you can do specific timing, pero like, let's say, the eighth drawing can be different according to the method of timing. So like, let's say when you're going to animate in threes, yung eighth drawing natin is like 1 second. If you do ones and twos, that's an entirely different story. And again, yung time chart natin tends to have different methods of timing. So with that one, it tends to be it kind of is a little bit more abstract. Whereas for this one, pag sinabing you're going to utilize this frame, you know that this is for the first second o kaya naman the first foot or whichever. So here we have the different characteristics of an exposure sheet. So it's usually utilized for traditional animation. In digital animation, what we tend to use is a timeline. However, for if we're going to move on with, like, let's say paperless animation o kaya naman that merging of digital and traditional animation, you can still utilize yung information na nasa exposure sheet towards a timeline. And as we've stated, it's more accurate and detailed than a timing chart. It can be used for any method of timing. And for this one, it is a little bit more technical. Therefore, it's less abstract compared to that of a time chart. So what can you add in an exposure sheet? So first of all, you have, of course, your timing. The second one, which is not really seen in a time chart, is your camera movement and instructions. You do have that in your layouting, but it's not really necessarily seen in, let's say, your storyboard or even in your time chart. It's usually part of special instructions. We also have character and object movement and instructions. So, yung sa may time chart kasi natin, it can only focus on at most one character. If two characters are doing the exact same thing, then possible na iisang time chart lang natin. Even in some cases, usually yung isang time chart natin can only cater for one body part. And then you have, let's say, you have another time chart for another body part. So for this one, iisang exposure sheet can be for an entire scene already with all of your layers. And Also, we have the proper ordering of layers, so you'll be seeing that one, particularly for the camera movement and instructions, and audio syncing, which is, if anything, the exposure sheet in the industry is usually only used for audio syncing. Pero like let's say any other movement, it's possible for you to just utilize a time chart. The audio syncing kasi requires a lot of precision when it comes to utilizing your time. So with that one, it's mostly utilized for audio syncing. And since for a lot of our cartoons, we have a lot of dialogue, then it would always be something that's used. Unless you're going to create more of a silent film, you don't need to use an exposure sheet. So with that one more thing sa main note kasi natin, essentially it's important for you, even though that you're going to use an exposure sheet, you need to understand how to use time charts, how to interpret time charts, as well as methods of timing, drawings, frames, and feet, ano yung mga difference nun, and favors and thirds timing. So we've discussed a lot of those ones previously, starting from your animation 12A. So hopefully all of those things would be useful to you as we press on with this lesson. Next one is on preparation for the audio. So ito, I'll just be talking a little bit about audio. I don't really want to take so much of this one because, again, this is an entirely new department. But for you guys, since you are the ones who are going to create your own recordings, we need to at least tackle a little bit about audio. So audio in animation depends on when it's going to be used. So actually, there are two main ways of how you can look at audio. Audio is usually something which we call as diegetic. Diegetic is something or music or audio that exists in universe. So like let's say if someone is speaking, that's diegetic. If there is a background noise that is created by objects within a scene, that's diegetic. Or if you have background music that the characters doesn't really hear, then that is non-diegetic. O kaya naman for musicals, if they are singing something, if they're humming something that, or if there's something that comes up on the radio, that is usually diegetic. So, in a lot of animations, ang pinaka-fino-focus natin is diegetic. The non-diegetic ones, like let's say background noises, all of those things aren't really necessary. You can even divide diegetic and non-diegetic music according to these three parts: music, sound effects, and voice recording. So, the one that's really important when you're utilizing an exposure sheet is yung music natin and voice recording. Sound effects, not really that much, unless the sound effect is a very important part within your script. But even at that time, it's not really something that you can utilize, or you don't really have to utilize an exposure sheet just for a specific sound effect. Whereas for this one, especially if you're going to dance to certain music, there's certain types of rules that are in place compared to something like, let's say, voice recording. That's another type of thing that we have to look into. One thing that I would advise whenever you're going to create voice recording, like let's say you want to create lesser voice recording or lesser time for the exposure sheet, but still get that 3 to 5 seconds, add something which we call as pre-life. Pre-life is essentially incomprehensible sound effects that can create a certain emotion or reaction. So, for example, you plan to have the character speak after they've been surprised. But for you to showcase that certain surprise, you have to create kind of like a sound effect. So, a certain gasp, kaya naman, like a sound that would help evoke, sabihin natin, a sound that would help evoke, let's say, frustration. So, yung mga gasping, those kinds of ways, then that's possible for you. Next one, yeah. Anyway, going back, we have here tips for audio recording. So, essentially, this is more or less kind of general. Siguro the only thing that I would like to say is, again, add more pre-life if you want lesser complications when it comes to voice recording, but you would still want to hit that 3 to 5 second mark. Next one is the actual exposure sheet. So It depends from company to company. They have a certain format per exposure sheet. But the really important part is that this one, the one that is of a table, that's something that is more specific. So, yung mga nasa taas, that's kind of something that you can change for your own, or bahala kayo if you would like to change that or whatnot. So, for us, since we're utilizing it for or since you're a student, I need to have yung name, grade, strand, and section. But again, obviously in the industry, that's not really something that you need. What you need, however, are the following right here. So first of all is we have special instructions. So for the special instructions, if there's anything that you need to be able to note that's very important, then you can add that on the exposure sheet dito sa may taas, which is one of the first things that you actually place. And then based from the special instructions, it can then be reflected in the exposure sheet. Next one is we have the sequence, the title of the sequence. So like let's say anong nangyayari doon. We also have scene, which is the scene number. For us, you don't really need to add anything here. Siguro you just need to add scene 1. And then the page number or the sheet number. So for the majority of you, I believe you will only be using one sheet. Okay, for those who will be exceeding 4 seconds, then you'll need more than one. So 1 or 2. Hindi dapat 3, wala dapat akong makikitang 3 pages. And then we have all of these different parts. So the first one is action. Action is basically anything that is anything now wherein walang dialogue. So the dialogue would be on the dial. So anything that the character does, like let's say a change in facial expression, secondary actions, body movements, all of those ones are placed in action. Anytime that the character would be moving, aside from the fact that they are speaking, will be placed in action. So please try to be as detailed as this one. Ito walang specific instructions on how you can add the action. So for example, the basic premise that you can do is that you have the character and then what are they doing. So like let's say character moves, what arm, to what direction. So even though there's no specific format on creating the action, please try to be as specific as possible. Next one is detail. So for the detail, this one focuses more on the timing of your audio. So that can either be music o kaya naman that can either be dialogue. For dialogue, you're going to have to place the individual sounds that you have for the conversation. This one, yung 5 to 1 and then BG, these are your layers. So as we stated kanina, your exposure sheet can be something that you can create with multiple layers or within an entire scene. So even if you have 2 characters or 3 characters, it's possible for you to place them all in one exposure sheet. Whereas if you're going to create a time chart, you might need to have, let's say, 3 individual time charts. And also, if your movement is a little bit more complicated, then you can use this layer for individual body parts. So there's really no limit to that one. Siguro the only limit that you have is that number 1, yung BG natin, of course, yung background. If there's any movement, you'll have to place it exclusively right here. Number 2, you don't really need all 5 layers. There are other animation companies that have more than 5 layers. Pero ang pinaka-standard natin is usually around 5. You don't even use all 5 of them. You'll only be using like around 1 or 2 for most of the time. And number 3, in some animation studios, some of them would place the timing on layer 1. Some of them would place the timing on the camera instructions. So the one that I will be showcasing to you is that the time chart is placed right here. Pero really, you can place it either here o kaya naman sa may layer o kaya naman sa may last column. So your last column, we have camera instructions. So camera instructions specifies kung ano yung movement ng camera natin. So there are 3 things that we'll be focusing on. The first one is camera angle. So that is your medium shot, close-up shot, POV, establishing shot, and so on. The second one is the camera movement. So while the scene is still happening, anong nangyayari? So like let's say pan to, zoom in, zoom out, dolly zoom, Yung mga ganon, those are usually examples of camera movements. And then camera transitions focuses on movement from one scene to another. So like let's say fade in, fade out, jump cut, simple cut, yung mga ganon. Those are examples of camera transitions. So you can place all of those three right here. You don't have to place them in every single frame. Actually, the only thing that you need to be able to place in every single frame, if possible, is within the dial. And even then, you can have, like, let's say, one sound encompass an entire second if necessary. So that is for your different parts of your exposure sheet. One thing that I would also like to focus on is yung number of lines natin dito. So the number of, or isang horizontal row natin dito represents one frame. So regardless if you have, if you're animating in ones, twos, or threes, this is always 24. So, yeah, you would have 24 frames lagi dito. We're not really focusing on the drawings, pero it is possible for you to do that. So one frame is one row. There are 96 rows. So for that 96 rows, you have the following measurements. So nakalagay siya, I think right here. So since you have 96 frames, ang maximum time natin is 4 seconds. Productivity is 8 feet. So if you remember, productivity is a measurement for us to be able to distinguish productivity. So like let's say in the olden days pala. So you are usually paid according to the number of feet that you've animated. So we have like a small trivia portion right around here. So you can read that on your module later on. Pero essentially, you only have 8 feet. So naka-divide siya according to the productivity. So if you're going to have this one thicker line, this is 8 frames. And then we have another one, that is another 8 frames. So you can read, you can look up that one. So itong double lines na to, this is equivalent to 1 second. So for 1 second, you have 16 frames. For if you're going to animate in ones, or sorry, mali pala. So sorry. This is an equivalent of 2 frames pala, or 2 feet. Yung 24 frames natin should have 3 feet. So 1, 2, 3, because we're talking about frames pala. So from the third frame, or from the third indication right here, this is 1 second. So you can actually count. So this is 1 second, and then this one, 1, 2, and then 3. That's another second. 1, 2, and then 3. That's the third second, and then 1, 2, and then 3. That's the last second. So you only have 4 seconds right here. If you would like to utilize one's animation, it's possible for you to have that. So ang gagawin mo lang is that you would have, of course, this is the first drawing, second drawing, third drawing, and so on and so forth. If you're going to utilize two drawings, dapat may space in between. So for example, you will be starting at 1 right here. Dapat ang next na drawing mo should be right around here. And as stated, pag 3s ang ginagamit natin, you would have 1 and then leave 2 spaces and then have 4 afterwards. So that is something that you will have to take into consideration. Yun muna yung mga parts natin. Last one is yung sa may layers natin. So for your layers, you would usually see that 1, or the number 1, that is the very foreground. 5 is the backmost layer. Or sorry, mali pala. 5 is the most foreground layer. And then your background is the most background layer. So this one is more or less the kind of standard, pero it's possible for you to be able to utilize 1 as the first layer and then 2 as the second layer. Pero for us, we will just be utilizing this one. So that is for your exposure sheet. Last part before we actually move on to the demo is breaking down the audio. So whenever you have an audio, it's important for you to be able to break it down before we actually see how it's supposed to be. So I'll be opening, I have a pre-made audio that we have right here that I will be utilizing for the demonstration. So it basically says the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. And for this one, before you actually move on to the exposure sheet, there are some things that you'll have to break down. First one are the nuances to your voice acting. So whenever you're doing voice acting, there are a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. So the way that we approach or um according to the voice, you would have to have different approaches. So, like, let's say the accent. So, the way that we say certain things, or in English, the way that we say certain things for an American accent compared to, let's say, a more Filipino accent, it depends on the accent. So, therefore, yung exposure ng consonants and vowels natin can be different. So, for example, we have this one right here, animation. So the last syllable right here, animation, the way that I state it is a little bit more of a neutral American accent. So if you have a more neutral American accent, you would say the last syllable as shun. So parang nawawala yung I-O. Ang naririnig mo lang is the T and then the N. Whereas for a more Filipino accent, you might say it as animation. So what happens right there, you have a lot of emphasis on the O. So yung timing natin for shun versus shon, you can already notice that the American accent tends to have lesser time for that syllable. And then for a Filipino accent, you have a lot more time to use when you're going to utilize this type of accent. So the accent matters in such a way that the way we pronounce certain consonants and vowels will affect yung timing natin. So probably the way that one voice actor would say a certain word can have different exposure times. Next one naman is intonation. So intonation focuses on the rise and the fall of the voice in speaking. So why does this matter? Particularly when you want to stress something, you need to make it slower. So that's just an old adage when it comes to voice acting. If you would like to emphasize something, you have to speak it a little bit slower and therefore a little bit clearer. So a lot of the stress parts in a word would have a lot more exposure time compared to something that is secondary stress or even not stressed. So to give you another example, same word, animation. So whenever you're saying the word animation, you would already notice that there's a certain highest point and a certain lowest point. The may in animation is your most stressed word. So therefore, when I'm going to differentiate those ones, what would happen is that I would take a lot more time for the may compared to the na, and shun. So those are just some things. And even we have other more intricate ways, like let's say secondary stress, which is kind of like more stress, but not as much as your primary stress. And then we have our unstressed. So the only thing that's really important right here is that something that is most stressed tends to be slower, and therefore in your exposure time, they need to have a lot more emphasis. Lastly, we have vowels and consonants. So the way that we pronounce vowels and consonants are also different. So vowels, they tend to be stressed or unstressed, whereas for consonants, it's more of voiced and voiceless. So therefore, consonants don't really have a lot of exposure time. So that means in your exposure sheet, there would be some instances that it would only take up 1 frame or 2 frames or even no frame at all. Whereas for your vowels, except for one certain sound, you would have to have a lot more time for you to emphasize them compared to consonants. And for you to be able to have a more in-depth understanding for vowels and consonants, there is somewhat of a need for us to understand phonetics. Pero for this one, it's not really entirely necessary that you use these specific vowels, these specific consonants. You can just simply spell them out and then utilize those ones. But also, please be reminded that the way that we say certain things, yun dapat yung focus natin, not necessarily the way that it's stated. So we have vowels and consonants. So usually consonants would tend to have lesser they would have lesser time, and also they tend to have lesser variety. Whereas for vowels, whenever you're seeing someone speak, those are the things that you would tend to see because they tend to be longer. So with that one, every single vowel and every single consonant has a certain corresponding something which we call as mouth code. So the way that we say b, that has a different way of, or there's a different way on how your mouth would form. Your k, that's a different way on how your mouth would form. But there are some exceptions. Like let's say the way that you say f and yung v, yung f tas yung v, those are entirely they're mostly the same. Even saying the word b and p, they're usually the same. Yung vowels natin, those take up a lot more time. We have long words. I mean, we have long vowels and we have short vowels. So, let's say, ano nga ba? Yeah, itong U na to. We have a long U, we have a short U, we have a long I and a short I. So, in terms of mouth codes, there's not really a lot of difference, but the time actually matters. There is this one specific vowel sound, however, that is very important for American accents. You might not utilize this, but if you have a certain more or less Americanized accent, you would hear this a lot more in your vowels. This is something which we call as the schwa sound. So for you to be able, it's like a letter E, pero nabaliktad siya. So your schwa sound is essentially just, for me to be able to say this, cup. So yung cup natin, or even, again, yung animation. So the way that we say animation, the shun one, so you would also kind of see this as like an apostrophe. So this certain type of sound, it's kind of special because technically it is a vowel, but it's something that can replace a lot of instances. So for example, we have animation. We even have the word memory. So when you pronounce the word memory, you have memory. Pero if you're going to pronounce it in a more Americanized accent, you would say it more as memory. So parang nawawala yung letter O. So that O is replaced by the schwa sound. So if you see something like this, might I suggest that you only use either one frame o kaya naman in some instances wala pang frame at all. So you'll be seeing that word later on sa may later on how you're going to utilize your exposure sheet. Pero I'd just like to point that out as early as now. And then the last one is Snapboss. So Snapboss is essentially a video recording of the person doing the voice acting. So your Snapboss is mostly there to aid when it comes to your movements and your expressions. So particularly for a lot of voice actors, if you've seen professional voice actors, they really act out what they're supposed to say. And that really helps them get into character. And at the same time, for us animators, it's something that's very helpful for us to be able to get an idea on what the character's supposed to do. And for Natpause, probably you've seen this before on TikTok, pero there's this one person who does something which we call as mouth acting. So even though we create the same sounds, even though we say the same things, the way that our mouth moves might be different. So, for example, sa akin, I don't really move my mouth that much when I'm saying something, but you might have someone else who would really exaggerate their mouth movements, like ang laki ng buwanga nila when they're going to say certain types of things. And that would also affect, again, yung accent natin, intonation natin, and so on and so forth. And the last part right here is we have the steps in utilizing the exposure sheet. So let me just run down this one by one, really quickly, and then we'll move on to the actual demonstration. So the first one is production information. So again, you need to be able to place all of the contents sa may pinakataas. Next one is the timing. So for the timing, it's important for us to be able to analyze first your audio before we actually move on to the exposure sheet. So sorry, let me just open my Photoshop real quick while I'm explaining this one. Next one naman is layers. So layers, after mo ma-determine yung timing nung audio natin, you can now move on to the actual layers. So the layers would focus more on, again, secondary movements, facial movements. So essentially, the way that you're going to do this is very much similar to a time chart. So you can see it right here. So essentially, it's kind of like a time chart as well, but instead of having like all of the circles and then all of the lines, what you will be doing instead is that you'll be placing them a little bit more specific. And then lastly, setting up camera instructions. So if anything that you would need to add, you can place it right there. Okay, hi. So this is going to be a pre-recording of what we're going to do on how we're going to create the exposure sheet. So I have right here some of my materials. The first one is, of course, your exposure sheet. So the one that it has been given to you is a photo file. So the best way for you to be able to do this is either through downloading it as a picture and then opening it through either Photoshop or any other photo editing software or illustration software that you have, and then you can utilize your drawing tablet o kaya naman if you have your touchscreen option, your finger. This can be both for digital or for desktop o kaya naman for mobile phones. Whereas if you would also like to, you can print this and then place the statements there. That would be also great, and then take a photo of it for you to be able to upload. It is also possible for you to be able to copy this from scratch if you don't have a printer. Just make sure that you're able to fulfill all of the possible formatting instructions that we have. So let's go by it one by one first, and then I'll be showcasing you how you're going to answer that. But before that pa pala, I would also like to showcase yung audio. So for the audio right here, I have opened it in Audacity. So the advantage of this one is for you to be able to see the individual waveforms. And for Audacity, you can see the timing of it down to the very, I think this is like 1000th millisecond. So you can essentially time it as much as you would like to, as accurately as much as you would like to through the use of Audacity. But if you don't have this, you can still utilize other sources, like let's say your normal audio player. Just make sure that you're able to kind of track down how specific the second really is. So mga siguro around a tenth of a second would kind of work as well. So for this one, I'll be showcasing to you what the exposure sheet is. So for the exposure sheet, we have here our different parts. So first of all, of course, you have to write your name, and then you have to write your strand and section. Another thing that I haven't really stated is that I'll be using blue. If you have your blue, if you have your blue ink with you, please utilize that. But if you're just going to print it out or create your own, you can just use any type of colored pen. Next one, for the special instructions. So for the special instructions, it will showcase to you what are the different aspects that you need to take into consideration. So might I suggest right here, you would place the statement as well as your expression and facial expression and the body movement that you'll be doing. So for the special instruction, I'll be placing the statement. So the statement right here, let's listen to the audio.
The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog.
So you will just be showcasing that one. So I will be writing down here the statement. So we have, and then together with that one, you will be placing as well the facial expression that you will be doing. Next part is we're going to fill out all of these different details that we have. So the first one is sequence. So for the sequence, you'll just be stating what you're going to do. So we can just add their dialogue. For the scene, if you have an episode or a project, you would have it divided by scenes. Since we're only going to be creating one, you just need to create scene 1. And then for the sheet, you will be placing the sheet number or the page number for this exposure sheet. So in our activity, we'll only be utilizing either 1 or 2 pages. If you have 4 seconds or more, you will have to use 2 pages. According to our recording in Audacity, it ends by around 3.348 seconds. So that would be only a little bit over 3 seconds. So it's less than 4 seconds. So I will only be needing 1 sheet. So I'll be placing here my first sheet. And then we have of 1. So since I only have one page, I will be placing here the off one. If you have more than 4 seconds, you will have to place here off 2. Next portion is I'll be placing now the layers. So for the layers, please be reminded that your foreground is the one right here, the one in 5. And then the more background is up until towards the right side. Your background will be entirely different. So the detailing for these ones would really depend on you. So this can either be individual body parts, since we're only talking about a specific type of, we're only talking about one character. So probably, I can probably have here yung right arm. And then I can probably have a movement for the head. Since for this one, I have 2 movements. Meron akong movement for the hand, or since I'm going to be utilizing the arm to create it, I have here right arm, and then neutral to head turn. Since I have this head turn, then it will be reflected right here. So that is for your dialogue. Next part is we're going to now look into the timing itself. So we'll just be labeling these ones. So for us to be able to create that, what you can do is that per 8 lines, please try to number it down. So the numbering system, regardless of your method of timing, would still be the same. So 1 frame is equivalent to 1. Of course, if you want to create 2s, we would be starting at 1. If you want to create 2s, then you can place it right here, but you won't be numbering it as 2. Instead, you will be numbering it as 3. Similarly, if you want it to be animated in 3s, then you can just have this 4 and then afterwards 7. So for this one, we'll just be numbering the first frames per 8s so that we won't be confused so much. So we have 9. So let's try to label those ones first. Now, after you've labeled everything from your exposure sheet, what you will be doing is that you will be going back to your audio. So you will have to do a lot of back and forth from your audio, and then determining where are your first and then last portions. So of course, in your instructions, there has been a instruction stating that you would have to reduce the amount of dead noise or dead air as much as possible. However, you still need a little bit of space in between them, so you can't just go straight at it, particularly if you have different actions. So for example, if you would like to create an action before the character states, you can also do something like that. So there might need to be a certain amount of time, so you need to be able to determine where is the actual first statement and then the last statement. So for the last statement, you have right here, it ends by around 3.282 seconds. So this is a very specific time that we have, and it's quite difficult for us to be able to ascertain during the exposure sheet. So with that one, it would also be better for you to kind of understand where the different seconds are. So to kind of give you an idea, the first 3 eighths right here, 24 frames is equivalent to 1 second. So since we now know that our audio is beyond 3 seconds, we will be placing it right around this area. Next part is we're going to have to determine specifically from which of these eights there are. The best way for you to be able to determine this is to divide your 1 second into 3s. So as you can see right here, we have around this would be around 3 minutes and 33 seconds, the very end right here. Then we have 3 seconds rather, 0.67. So that would be this one right here, and then this would be this one right there. And then of course, this is your 1 second. So based on the audio recording, it is 3.82 seconds. So it is around here. So basically, this part, you will not be utilizing it. So there's actually no way for us to be able to determine where's the end of the sequence. So what you can do is to just simply delete it and not go after you've created your last mark. So we will be removing this time frames right here using, of course, our eraser. So we'll be ending right around here, probably for reference, 74, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. So probably would end around here for frame 80. But still, as you can see that we are ending by 282 seconds and not necessarily 3.33. So for this one, at this point, you might need to be able to do a little bit of estimation. For you to be able to get help in estimating it, at this point, it would be better for us to detail again the timing. So the timing that you will be doing again depends on your method, whether you'll be doing ones, twos, or threes. So for me, I would like to go on the default. So let's start on twos first. So let's have 75 and then 77 and then 79. So the 80 can just stay there. Then if you would like, you can divide this one again into fours. That's quite possible for you to be able to do. But that might take a lot of time. Probably you can do a little bit of smarter estimation. So as beginners, you can kind of divide this one again. So yung 0.33 natin, or just your normal 33, you can divide that by 4 and then get the actual computation. So let's try to calculate what that is. 33 dividing it by 4, that would be around 8.25 seconds. So around here, that would be 8.28. So it would be a little bit below right here. So if we were to differentiate where it is specifically based on the computation that you have, it would be probably around right here where your frame 78 is. But since we are following a specific method of timing, which is twos, I suggest to place it a little bit below. So you would have somewhat of a 1 frame delay. So you would be ending by around frame 79. So it would be right around here. You can erase your frame 80 right around there. So that's your very last keyframe. And then kind of try to determine what's your last sound. So our last sound right there is a letter G. So we will be placing it here on the dialogue first. For safety, might I suggest a capital letter instead of a small letter so that it's easier for us to be able to understand, and also to only place it in 1 frame. Though in reality, since we are utilizing twos, we would kind of have the idea that every single syllable that we have can be exposed to around 2 frames. So you can do something like that. If you have threes, then you would only utilize essentially around 3 frames per sound that you have. But later on, you'll be seeing that that's not really the best idea for us to do it in threes because you will have to pick and choose later on. Next one is for us to be able to look at the very first difference right here. So we are starting by around 0.49 seconds, which is actually, let's say, in frame 2. So for this one, what you can do right here is that we're going to delay it a little bit. So instead of starting off immediately at, let's say, your frame 1, there is a little bit of delay here. So we can place it at around frame 3. So again, you will be creating the sound. So when you're creating the sound, the word the is not really just T, it's actually TH, or in phonetics, we call it as the hard TH sound. So the way that I'm placing it right here is that it looks like it's just the spelling of how you actually spell it. You can do something like that, or you can just simply focus on the letter itself or the sound itself. So for example, when you're going to say the word quick, of course, you will be needing QU. That's just one sound. So you can just place there QU or just Q. Similar to the CK right here. Of course, your C is kind of part of your K already. So you can either write CK o kaya naman just K to make it easier for you. So we have now our establishment for the start and the actual end of our frames right here. So we'll be starting right around here, even though that we're actually going to start technically on 1. You can probably create a very small anticipation right around here before the character starts to speak. Next one is, now we're going to break it down per word. And this is really where the advantage of Audacity comes in. You can very much quickly ascertain where are the starts of every single word because of the waveform. So you can see right here that there is kind of like this low point and then suddenly it becomes higher. That's high point probably there is considered the actual start of the letter. So you have something like this. We'll do it per word. So we have quick, brown fox jumps over the, lazy, and dog. So let's start off first with the starting syllables. So again, you can play anytime you need to be able to guide yourself. So yung K natin would probably start around here. Let's double check.
Quick brown fox. Quick.
So your quick really starts there. So again, double check your time. It's around 3.22 seconds. So it's actually a little bit below here. So you can, again, add more. So your QU would probably be right around here. So only focus one frame each because later on we can extend that a lot more. Then, how about here?
Brown.
Okay, so my brown
Brown.
actually kind of starts here rather than here. Right here, it's already round. This one is brown. So this B right here is this voiceless B sound, or this voice B sound. Here's another thing. When it comes to consonants, you can kind of observe that there are two types of consonants. We have the voiced and we have the voiceless. So voiced are these examples, like let's say the B, and then, or sorry, this is the, this is K, and then this is B. Those ones are voiced because you can kind of hear them. Whereas something like the start of form, so those ones, I'm not really sure if you can hear it through the mic, but there is really a lot of, or you can't necessarily hear it. Even let's say your P sound, I'm just really exaggerating it, but in reality, you would say it more as like a P. So you can't really hear it. So for these ones, this would probably take around 2 frames. Whereas for your voiceless, it can either be 1 frame, or if you're utilizing 2's animation, then you might not have it at all. So let's have, going back, your B would probably be around here, 570. So that would be, again, I'm just adding more frames as I go. It would probably be right around here at frame 13. So again, you can divide it as much as you can. Try to divide, like, let's say your 8's right here. Divide it into 4. So your 0.33, divide it into 4, and then do some additions if necessary. So you could be able to determine where it is.
Fox.
Okay, so my fox is right there.
Brown fox jumps. Fox jumps. Fox.
Okay, so I'm really sure that it's right here. So it's very much towards the end. So my fox is actually at the very end of the first second. So it should be right around, adding more. You can remove that one later. So your fox would be right around here. So again, just only use 1 frame. Pero as you may have seen, the length that it took for me to be able to pronounce, or the length for it to be able to pronounce the sound F is actually much longer compared to the other beginning sounds that we've heard recently. Then you just keep adding more and more. I'll be speeding up through this, and then we can go back towards the next step. So let me just go back. So I've come right here towards your TH. I've already had the second the. So now I'm going to do the lazy dog. So the way that it's stated right here is quite interesting because this is something which we call as a connecting sound. So one of the very best examples that I can give you right now is the word did you. So if you're going to emphasize it, you will be saying it as did you. So it's 2 separate words. However, if you're speaking it as if you're not stressing it so much, there's a tendency wherein you're going to connect them. So this D and then this U would turn into J. So instead of saying did you might say did ya. So this would even be like a schwa sound right here. So your did ya. So for this one, this can still be placed in the exposure sheet. However, as animators, our challenge really mainly is for us to be able to determine where it actually begins and where it actually ends. So with that one, you'll really have to listen to it. All right, so I have placed right here all of my beginning sounds. So every single beginning sound right here has been done. And now the next part is for us to be able to do the last part. So the last sounds right here. Similarly, what you will be doing is that you will be finding, you'll be referencing the clip, find out where the start of the last sound is, and then place it over. In some cases, you will be seeing later that sometimes the last sound of the first word and then the second sound or the first sound of the second word kind of mix to each other. So they're kind of connecting. And with that one, you can either do one of two things with that. Either one, you can do a combination method of timing wherein in that part you would add a once if you would like to. The second part is that if you can't really hear it or to the point that you can't really understand where it is, what you can do is to remove it completely. For us, what's really important is really more of pronouncing those consonants, particularly the first words of the consonants. If you need to be able to change some of the sounds, that's also possible. So the example for did you, the D and then the Y has turned into a J sound instead. So those are your different options to how you're going to create it. So in this sequence, you will be seeing me employ a number of items. I can either be creating, or I will either be removing it entirely, or it's very clear for me to be able to hear. So you would hear even like a space between the last sound of the first word and then the first sound of the second word. So you might be able to hear that. In some cases, you won't really hear a clear distinction and so on and so forth. Let me just show you what I created for the and then the lazy dog. You can see right here that the TH sound and the L sound, they're just one frame apart. And when you're creating twos like this, you can either do one of the following. Again, you can add a very small sound here, or you can just remove it entirely and just have this TH sound be exposed for the two frames that it needs to. So in this case, I will just be leaving it as is. So my TH will be for this entire frame right here. Then for your for the others, I might have one frame. So probably for right here, I might create a different approach. So it really is more according to what you feel is more important as a sound when you're delivering the voice acting. You can again go back to the Snapboss if the character has created a lot of emphasis on it based on their facial expressions or how they have stated it with their body movements and all. Then you can essentially create. You can essentially help that one in determining what are the important sounds and the not so important sounds. So I'll get back to you once I've done all of the last words or the last sounds of the words. Okay, let's try to look at the word brown.
Brown fox, brown fox, brown fox, brown fox.
You can kind of hear it when you hear the entire word, but if you try to listen to it in a more specific way,
Brown fox, brown fox, brown fox,
go back,
brown fox, brown fox.
you kind of start to not hear the word N or the sound N. So as a as a consonant, it's quite natural that you won't be able to give it as much time as you need. So in this case, I might be removing the word or the sound N, and instead I will just be utilizing the W sound or the ow sound. So
Brown
my F
Brown fox.
my F kind of starts here. My W kind of starts here. So would be going right around. Okay, so when it comes to the word fox, you might be able to see the word F, O, and then X. But in reality, this X sound is more or less a KS sound. So instead of having this X, I will just be focusing on this S sound. So going back. So those are all of your ending sounds. So as you can see right here, we've employed some of the concepts that we have. So your the right here has been included. However, the right here for the lazy dog has not been added. For your brown, we have not added the N sound, instead just opted for the W sound. Um, we have also created right here for quick. Instead of placing it on twos, we have placed it on ones so that we would be able to hear a little bit of this one because it's a really important sound. And with those ones out of the way, we can now go back to every single word and then individually listen to them as necessary. So for the majority or for some of these words, you only need maybe one or two sounds left. For the word the, you don't really need to add anymore because the first and then the last sounds is already there. For example, the word quick, you only need to place where the I is, determine how long your Q is and your K is, and then for the last sounds as well, determine how long they should be able to get. In some instances, there would be some silence, so you'll have to take those ones into consideration as well. So for you to be able to showcase how long something is, you would have to place a line over them. So if in case you would be able to see something that does not have a line, that would indicate complete silence. So, or the character's mouth should not be moving. So they can have it closed and then afterwards open it, or just lay it or just retain it if necessary. So again, look for the nat pause, how they have acted it out. For this one, we're just really listening to the audio. By the way, a lot of the consonants right here should only have around 2 frames. There would be some instances wherein it would elongate, particularly for more for more voiced sounds, particularly the sounds, okay, or anything that you can elongate. Those are usually something that can occur for more than 2 frames. But more or less, as you can see, for quite a number of them later on, a consonant would only have around 1 or 2 frames exposure time. So for example, this quick, I essentially know that this is only going to be 1 frame. So 1 frame lang to, and then everything else will be for the letter I. So for the letter I, what I can do is that I can just write it as one word and then make this one a bit longer. Or to make it easier for you, you can just place the letter I for all of these frames. So there you go. Then let's go back to the others. So my last statement right here, G, kind of has a lot of exposure time. So I will be placing it right around here, then replacing it. So here we have the entire dial scene. So anything that doesn't really have anything on it, even considered as a line, is silence. So if you would need to be able to place something there or a continuation, what is needed to be done is you need to add a line similar to this. So you have silence right here, Everything else right here, there should be sound that's moving, so the mouth should be moving. Right here, you can have the S elongate by just holding the position, or just make you can also close the mouth if necessary. So you can do something like that. So your frame 35 right here, there's no voice. Everything else tends to have up until this one right here, your 57. So for your frame 59, there should be nothing here. Frame 59 and 60, there should be nothing there. Then it goes back to having statements, or having word, or having an audio. Another thing that I have seen right here, how the word lazy has been created. So lazy is spelled with an A, but this A is actually pronounced with an EY. So the way that you pronounce it really slowly, lay, you would hear an E and an E. So that is what I have reflected right here in this time chart. So that is actually one of the longer parts of the exposure sheet, which is the dial. And then the next part, what we're going to do is we're going to add the actions as well as the camera instructions. Together with the action, we'll be looking into more great detail right here for the right arm and then the head. So first of all, let's try to detail the actions that they will be creating. So probably we can have, let's say, first one is the hand movement during the jump. So let's say they can probably create this motion, jumps right over the lazy dog. So jumps. So what would happen right here is that you can place it on where jumps begin. So hand. This is technically a special instruction, so you can place the special instruction right here. Then we can have one neutral head turn. Probably you can have the head turn at the very beginning. So let's say the character can be having a side view. So it doesn't really have to be like entirely specific, or it doesn't have to be rather entirely extravagant, but try to be as specific as possible. So the next part that we're going to do is that we're going to now create the time charts for your right arm and for your head. So the first one is this one right here for your side view to front view. I don't really want to make this really long. I would just like to create it during the sequence of the. So what I will be doing is that I will be utilizing the frames right here for me to create the entire sequence. So I can probably start right here for frame 1. So for me to be able to create the time chart, I need to be able to assign a capital letter or a letter assignment for every single layer. So since head is starting with an H, that's how it usually works. So you would have H and then 1. So I would understand right here that it should start from frame 1 right here. Next one is we can probably end up until the. So your H5, your H5 would be right around here. So those are your time charts, or those are your keyframes. And then of course you have your H3. So you essentially already have a time chart. So if you were to translate this one into a time chart, your H1 up until your H5, then your H3 would be right around there. Hand motions. So for the hand motions, you can probably have this type of motion. So for the right arm, we will just be having it as R instead. You don't need RA, just have R. So we'll be starting right here, R. And then it depends per studio. So for some studios, if you have an R right here, this would automatically be R1. However, that might be quite confusing. So might I suggest what you would do is to follow the timing chart based on the dial. So instead of starting with R1, let's start with R37. Then you can probably have jumps over. You can have something like that. So we can have like a you can have a frame right here, which is your breakdown frame. So we will be naming that one as R47. Then over. Then we can end right around here. So we'll be ending by around R53. So these are your main keyframes. Your breakdown frame is right here. And then you can assign if you need to be able to add much more specifications. So probably for jumps over, you can probably place right here at R49. That can be a specific one. So you can add a lot more detail right around here. So you can actually create even illustrations right here. So let's just have it by statement. R47, it kind of tends to a plateau. So for R37, it goes up. Then you can add a lot more frames right here. So probably it's trying to slow down. So for this one, you can turn it again into another time chart. So that ends for that. Then for the camera instructions, again, you can specify if you would like to suddenly within this frame, you can, let's say, you can kind of zoom out a little bit. Natin, you can even specify how long it would be. What you can do for this one is probably for an entire, for the entire head turn, you can have it zoom out if you would like to. You can even add other camera instructions if necessary, but in your activity, that's not really necessary. So that ends with creating your exposure sheet. So I hope this kind of gives you an idea of how you're going to go about with your activity. If you have any questions, please let me know. And with that one, good luck on creating your exposure sheet. I hope this kind of gives you an idea with how you're going to actually create an animation, and it would help you hone your skills a lot more. So bye everyone.